Hello everyone, this is Edwin Mengíbar, and in this opportunity I'm going to talk about the natural approach in the English language teaching. So I'm going to start with the beginning of this method or approach. Okay, how this method or approach originate? This method was developed by an American teacher named Savard in 1860 as an alternative that opposed the traditional method of teaching foreign language because it proposed that a second language can be learned in the same way as we learn our first language through practice and constant repetition of different linguistic expression. The method lacked a theoretical basis on language learning as the author did not specify what language is, how a language works, and never officially presented a project where he could prove his theory that a second or foreign language can be learned in a natural way through a series of communicative practices. However, despite lacking of theoretical linguistic basis, the method was more effective than the traditional method because it focused on the development of communicative skill rather than the other learning or grammatical rules. The natural approach also was developed by Tracy Terrell and Stephen Krashen and was introduced in a book, The Natural Approach, in 1983. This method is based on observation how children acquire their native language. It attempts to adapt this process of language acquisition to an adult learning environment. But what are the underlying principles of the method approach? In 1884, F. Frank published in Germany a work on the physiological principle of the association between form and meaning in the target language, the content of which provides theoretical justification for the currents that define teaching without recourse to the first language. According to Frank, a second language is the best learner if it's used directly and actively. If the teacher can teach new vocabulary using mimicry or drawings, and if students are able to infer grammatical rules rather than learn them through analytical procedures. Savard and Frank's approach have their roots in movements of the mid-19th century, a time when several specialists in language teaching began to question the grammar translation method and to express the need to look for new ways of teaching. In its extreme form, the method takes the form of monologues by teacher interspersed with exchange between the teacher and the student in the form of question and answers. Everything is done in the target language with the help of gesture, drawings, and objects. Repetition plays an important role, and only after the student have a considerable knowledge of the spoken language do we move on to the written language and the inductive teaching of grammar. So, what does the natural method say? It points out that a language is acquired naturally and unconsciously through use in real communication, just as children are not aware of how they get their native language, and even parents do not bother to teach their children about grammatical rules, types of verbal expressions, or whether their children are using the correct preposition. when expressing themselves. They only realize that children try to communicate little by little with the language, and that is enough for them to adopt their mother tongue. In this way, people can acquire a second language without the need to translate what they are learning into their mother tongue, and without worrying so much about grammatical rules. Having said this, these methods point out that in order to learn grammar, it is not necessary to resort to the translation of text as a traditional method does, but rather to teach grammar in a progressive, inductive way, and through the constant repetition of certain expression in different verb tense without the need to specify to the student that the type of tense he or she is using, as this discussed and analyzed at more advanced levels. When the student already have sufficient command of the spoken language. But what are the teacher roles? The teacher should create a pleasant and relaxed learning environment, and should select, organize, and provide appropriate activities and linguistic material that respond to the needs and interests of the student. To do this, the teacher should ask multiple questions to stimulate the use of the language and introduce some expression and new vocabulary using mime, gesture, some drawings, and objects with the intention to the student can associate certain phonemes or oral expressions with certain objects or images, so they will gradually adopt the oral language before the writing language. Having said this, what should the teaching and learning process be like according to this method? In the first session, the teacher should present orally with objects, drawings, and mimicry an adequate amount of vocabulary that the student can easily recognize, such as objects in a classroom, a home, or an office. He or she can also present some commonly used phrases, such as greeting or farewells, so that the student can put them into the practice little by little with his or her classmate or people who speak the language. What is the student roles? Learner's roles. Within this approach, it is commented that the learner's responsibility consists mainly of providing information about their needs and objectives so that the acquisition activities are tailored to them. Learning and using conversation control techniques to regulate input, deciding when to start producing in the target language, agreeing with the teacher on the amount of time to be spent on the different learning activities. Consequently, the role of learners changes according to their stage of linguistic development, their decision about when to speak, what to say, and what linguistic expression to use. Is there any negative aspect about using it with children? Justify your response. Although some studies have shown that children acquire proficiency in a foreign language more quickly, this depends on certain aspects of language study. In this regard, one especially notes the following: how impertinent is the imagination and the understanding to learn language and ways of speaking? Prove it clearly childhood, which within the age in which man is more lacking in these two powers. With all the children learns any language better than older men, although they are more rational. What are the advantages and disadvantages of this method approach? advantages. It refers to access to the language without the intervention of translation. In the evaluation, there is interaction between teacher and student. And at the end of each class, a text is written about the class. Language learning should take place direct contact with the language being studied, and the mother tongue should be excluded from the classroom. Improves the student fluency and confidence to express him or herself in the language being learned, which has a positive impact on the student ability to express him herself in writing. Helps improve reading comprehension by providing a wide range of vocabulary and expression that promote language immersion. Disadvantage: the teacher is the one who directs all activities in classroom, but all those for some initiatives on part of the student. In the beginning, this method was only accessible for those with high economic condition, and it's only applied in private school because it depends on the number of the student in them. It must be reduced. But is the method appropriate for elementary school EFL classes? Since education is facing constant changes and various challenges, the educator must have enough tools to optimally teach children through teaching methods and developing from educational needs. For a method to be efficient, it is necessary to consider the aspect and singularities of the student, what they must learn, how their cognitive and learning abilities are, determining their strengths and weaknesses. Some of the current and innovative teaching methods adapt to the new learning needs of the student, and that's very educator should apply in the classroom. So, considering that the school-age students are exposed to a very limited input, in many times this input occurs in large group settings. How effective is this method to provide a student with meaningful input? One of the most relevant conclusions reached in studies aimed at explaining academic achievement is the fact that the relationship between academic achievement and certain aspects such as age, gender, and socioeconomic level are constantly reported, regardless of the analysis technique used or in the educational level at which research is conducted. As we know, this method is aimed to the beginners because it's the same way as we learn a language as a mother tongue. It would be better if the group of students are reduced and not too large group, because we are trying to communicate directly and only speaking. Okay, and this is my explanation about the direct method or natural method approach, and I hope you agree with me in the most of the content. I try to do my best, and I hope you like it. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.